Hey, what's good? This is Brother Mose, Underground Footy Podcast. Just letting you know if you want to support what we're doing here, you can just hit us up on pgyoungboys.com. Anyway, let's get down to the show. All
Some
right,
come sideways, some
ladies
come
and
straight
gentlemen,
way.
I'm back. I got my guy, Mutanda. I'm not gonna mess up your last name. Pronounce it for me before I do.
Kwesele.
Kwesele. All right, Mutanda Kwesele is on the set, and so I have to ask you, just like I ask everyone else. You ready to step on the subway?
Ready to step on the subway. Let's go.
All right, all right. So, for those of you that don't know, I'm going to tell you a little about this guy, and then he can tell you the rest that I mess up. But I met Mutanda out in Columbus, and he's coaching for Columbus Crew, the U14 team, and that was one of the first things that I noticed was the diversity of the coaching staff there, and that was my first initial impressions, and of course I've done a podcast with Kelvin, the director, and I knew I wanted to get you on. I've been following you on Twitter, and for anyone who wants to really get to know this guy, does not hold any cut cards. All right, he says what he means. He means what he says, and as he says, it's always best to just be yourself. You know. So one of the things that I want to do is get your Twitter handle out there because you got some really good stuff. So if you could just give that to the people?
Yeah, it's I believe it's at Rising Point One, right?
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Actually, it's at the Rising Point, and then the number one digit. So TheRisingPoint 1. That's where you
Okay.
can find me.
Now I'm going by the intro. I want you to tell me about how did you get into the game? First, as a player. I mean, what brought you into this?
Yeah, my dad. Simple. And just from a young age, right? Just playing with him in the park, and then you discover. So I was born in Zambia, and my family moved to Seattle when I was 4.
Mhm.
And you learn, being a Zambian, and being from the continent of Africa, you're told, oh, it's in your blood. All the people play, and you start to learn what that means, right? Actually, my first uh, sport that I could say I truly loved. I love soccer, but it was always like, again, that's just a part of the culture.
Mhm.
And I really got into basketball growing up in Seattle because I grew up in the '90s in the heyday of the Sonics,
Mhm.
right? So that was, and then growing up, I played pickup basketball, the kind of culture that I know you and lots of folks that I follow want to rep with the game. Cheers, sir. Thank you so much. That kind of pickup culture. I grew up with that with basketball, but then with soccer, just playing since I was 5, 6 years old, and just went from there.
Now,
But
now you played when you got to uh, Seattle.
mhm.
Now, were you in a Zambian community, or was it
No,
just you were just in with the general
yeah, no.
population?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we lived in we lived in the west side of the city,
Mhm.
in this housing complex that had had some diversity, had some different kind of folk there.
Mhm.
It wasn't quite low income housing, but it was a lot of working class folk. Um, there was my best friends growing up in the housing complex, in the apartment complex, were East Indian, a family from Mexico, and so we used to run around a lot and play in the neighborhood. And actually, and we did a bunch of different sports. We played some soccer. There was a little yard like facing our apartment building where we actually played. And again, in a different culture, this is what I mean. In a different culture, that would have been full of kids playing, right? But it was myself and maybe one or two other kids who were really into the game. But honestly, we did a lot of other things. Like we played. I remember playing home run derby, right? We would just we play some baseball, broke some
Yeah.
windows, got in trouble, doing that kind of thing. So, and then I got into soccer just based on, at school, playing there with some kids who were also passionate about it. And then by the age of 6, 7, my parents found the West Seattle Soccer League, or it was West Seattle Soccer Association, one of those, just like a 5-a-side league or something that I joined. And then it went from there. I just never stopped.
Okay. And so how far did you go in the game?
Professional. And it was I played, didn't get drafted in MLS, but I played. I made the most of, I think, my often frail body at times. I'd like to say. So I mean to say that I walked on at Santa Clara, which at the time, that was in 2000. It was 2005 when I made the team officially, and I was one of maybe 3 walk-ons. And the program at that time was like number 4 in the nation. Some amazing players there, Division I, which maybe my body type or and my just the level I played at before that, maybe you could say he's not going to make it there. But I ended up making the team, and so played there, but just for 1 season. Transferred to Seattle U, where I finished out. So I ended up playing maybe 2.5 seasons, 3 seasons of ball at Seattle U. And then after that, I went to I played with the Portland Timbers. That was 2009, and they were USL 1 at the time. So that was my first real contract or semi-contract, right? It was kind of like you're on the U23s, but you train with the first team, which in hindsight maybe I would have done differently, but that's how it worked out. And then after that, I went to Canada, so FC Edmonton of the NASL, and I ended up playing 1 season there, and that was it. That was 2011 was my last contract. After that, he's a little bit of injuries, but also just you're bouncing around. I was 25 at the time, haven't really established yourself. It's like, okay, what am I going to do next? Do I keep on bouncing around lower leagues, or do I maybe do something else? And so that was my journey in the game. But yeah, I'm happy to say that I reached that far, and for sure, it maybe you've heard us from Ramsey as well and some of the guys at the academy, but it definitely informs my coaching and the way I look at the game for sure.
Okay. Yeah, because I tend to think that the generation of coaches that are coming now, right, that because they've been through coaches and not coaches that had, soccer for dummies in their back pocket, but actually guys who played and were in the struggle, that there may be more of a empathy or an understanding as opposed to a more selfish view. Plus, you can give perspectives about things these guys are dealing with, especially like in the case of injuries and things like that that are part of the game. When our guys were coming up, I mean, they played, and at the younger ages, these guys are made out of like silicone or rubber. They don't really, you don't see anything at that moment in time. And as much as they want to play, you'll let them play. Somebody says, hey, can he play for us? You're like, okay, let's play. And it wasn't until around the ages of 12 or 13. And the reason I'm going through this is because I have a lot of parents that listen to this podcast. And so, one of the things I want to say is that quantity is not necessarily better than quality. And when you're younger, you can say, like, especially like when we were coming up, and let's say like I grew up playing, basketball, baseball, soccer wasn't what my neighborhood friends played. But people say, oh man, when we were young, we just played and nobody ever was injured. I said, but the thing is, you could automatically say the guys come knock on the door, hey, you want to play? And you're like, I don't feel like it today. And you go on about your business. these kids these days, I mean, if you got 4 training sessions a week, they're expected to go to 4 training sessions a week. They don't necessarily listen to their bodies because, you know, that that's what they do. You know what I mean? They play ball, and they do it differently than what people in other cultures may do, as far as the way they play all the time, but they're not forced to play. It's like it's a labor of love, and I would assume, I'm not from any of these other places, that some days they might go 2 3 days and maybe they got to work with their dad or whatever, and they're not playing. You know?
Yeah, so first I'd say for me personally, my playing experience has I think it provides a great lesson in humility, in the sense that, as a coach, there's a struggle when you're in front of players. There can be a struggle sometimes to not necessarily just to be taken seriously, but rightfully so. As kids age and they have their own experiences, they want the adult in front of them to prove something to them. Number one, prove that you care about me, right? So there's an element of trust. Can we trust you? And then once, obviously, that there's the care element, but then there's also the well, do you know what you're doing, right? So trust.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you're I mean, I'll use the example of Diego Maradona because he's like the extreme example of like one of the best players ever to walk the earth, who I think a consensus we can all say maybe wasn't the very best coach, right? So that just kind of proves the point that obviously like the very best players don't always make the best coaches. However, and Maradona proves this, even though he's maybe an outlier, but the point still stands that if you've played at a certain level, well, then automatically you have maybe a little bit more in your bank in terms of trust for a certain age of kids, right? Youngest kids don't really care, but you know what I mean? Like an academy kid, yeah, you're a national team player, former national team player, whatever, you played in the Champions League. It's like, okay, players will be like, oh yeah, I want to learn from that guy. That's not my story. However, because I've played at the levels that I did and had that experience and know what it's like to try to be a player and strive and fight just to get noticed, or just to make a team, and just to get playing time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's humility in that. So number one, I first still think of myself as a player, in the sense that I'm always, maybe you ask Kelvin, ask anyone at the crew, like I'll be the first to jump in with the U19s or with the whoever. It's like, oh, do you need a coach? I want to play. So because I always want to play. I'll always tell players the very best thing is playing. As much as I love coaching, I don't think other coaches are lying when they say that they love coaching more than anything. Not that. Me personally, I'm very comfortable in saying that the very best thing is playing. Full stop. You ask me now, would I rather coach or play? I'll say, I'll play. Let's play. What that does for the players I coach, though, is I think it allows me then to step back and say, well, I've got to serve them because it's their journeys, right? So, and I understand that because of my playing history, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So how did you get into the coaching side?
Just once my journey, right, my odyssey as a player was really wrapping up, I thought, well, I like teaching as well, so that being a student I have other passions, of course, but what I found within the game was a way of connecting with people, with young people especially, and of making change, of building community. And of course, maybe we'll get to this later, but that's what created, my organization, the Rising Point. But what I love about the game, what I always loved about the game, was the camaraderie, and the way that you could, navigate this space, right, with teammates, and go through these moments together and create beauty, right? I know that maybe that sounds corny, but I think the game is an art. It's like a band, right? Making music, which is again why I look at the game a certain way, and why I'd like to play a certain way. So what got me into coaching was learning from mentors and wanting to be a catalyst for that process for young kids, right? How do I facilitate that? Well, I got to learn how to take my ideas about the game and my playing history and all that, and then learn how to channel that to helping other people experience the wonders of the game. That's
now,
coaching.
now I would say I can definitely relate to the music side, right? Because that was something that I did for a long time, and then it reached a point where I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna get to the level I want to get to. But I was like at the point where, man, I'm so sick of this mess. I'm gonna go drive a truck. I didn't even want to listen to me. I was, I was a little salty for a minute. And then, but it's what you love. You always go back to. It's like, when they say people grew up in church and they leave, but somehow or another they end up back. So I would say, I see the same thing in soccer or football. And, but the thing is now people want to know. So, okay, you're coaching. There's tons of coaches. How did you end up at Columbus?
Me personally, how did I end up at Columbus? Well, that honestly, it was people open doors for you, and I have to shout out Dennis Sanchez for that. Dennis was someone that I met in Seattle, and working with him within the Washington State elite player development system or pathway, and just I ran it. He and I crossed paths a few times. And he reached out to me when I was doing a camp in Ohio already with Rising Point. I was doing a high school camp up in the Cleveland area. And he calls me randomly and just says, hey, what's going on? We connect. And then also it was crazy, unbeknownst to him, there was I wouldn't even say a mutual friend, but a mutual contact. That also put, well, he's a friend now, but somebody who put my name out there and made a recommendation for me that Dennis, circled back with, or so all these basically these things aligned, right, to like get me the opportunity. But real quick though, that's to your point earlier about you never know who's watching, right? And or I guess I would say to change that a little slightly is the impact that you, or the feeling that you leave people with, and how you work with people is important, right? And obviously sometimes it doesn't go great, but those relationships, you have to. The reason you got to be consistent about who you are and always be true to who you are. Oh, maybe you can hear my son in the background. Beautiful sound. I missed that sound. It's been a long time, but no, I didn't realize when I was, because it had been like at least 4 or 5 years since before Dennis called me for the crew position to interview, that I had worked with him,
but you made an impression, obviously.
That was that was the word I was looking for. But to make an impression on folks is that like you about how you are, right? And it's it was genuine enough. The work he somehow thought of me in some way. Maybe there are other people he thought of as well, but it just so happened that he called me, and that was really that simple. Honestly, I didn't didn't plan for it.
And to bring that back around to, the fact of, like, I always tell young players, I don't care if you're playing pickup, I don't care what the situation is, there's always someone watching, right? And so you can't, like, some kids, they want to say, hey, guys are getting together to play. Well, who's playing? It's like, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, sometimes you get kids like, when they're young, they come back, and you know how you put together your little pickup groups in training, right?
Yeah.
So they would come home and, man, my team was selling. I had such and such and such and such. And what I got to them was this. This was the message I sent. I said, you carry your team.
Yeah.
I said, if you're going to be a competitor, it doesn't matter who you're with. You lead that group. And guess what? Sometimes coaches do put you with not who you might select so you can crush everyone. They want to see, how does this dude react if he's the band leader instead of a member of the band? And I know that there's so many, I realize it now, there's so many mental games or mental challenges that I don't want to call it games because that kind of makes it sound like, but mental challenges that coaches put forth for players. And, mommy and daddy can't always help you because ultimately it's about how you play, right? and and the impression you make on people. Because I've seen guys that were really talented, but they just maybe were jerks.
Yeah, it's about relationships, right? And
Hmm.
it's about uh football is not a game of actions, it's a game of interactions, right? And
Yeah, yeah,
it's a game of how you relate to, how you navigate space, and how you relate to other people within these spaces, right? And if you learn the game in that way, it changes the way you see it and the way you behave, right? So absolutely, when that's awesome. That's the best thing about pickup culture,
yeah,
right? Is that you're thrown into this environment where uh, you have to really get to know the people that you're playing with in order to be successful. So if you're playing king of the court, whatever,
yeah,
or even if you're just like
yeah,
competitive at all, the first thing you got to do is start to really, really understand how the different parts of your team operate,
yeah.
how
And
the
if
different
you need to
people
move someone maybe who isn't as sure of themselves, right?
or yeah, if you're really good, or if you're really good, you got to figure out where should you play. It's funny watching pickup and watching players organize themselves, even at I mean the academy sessions when I would do this with the younger teams, like watching how kids position themselves or position other players is really interesting, because you're starting to learn how they recognize their own strengths and the strengths of their teammates, right? The
Hmm.
thing about it is how many kids really struggle with understanding, number one, uh, what they do well, they themselves, like what is my contribution, but also like how their teammates like to play, right? The first thing you got to do, in my opinion, is understand like who you can connect with, who you can combine with. And notice right there, I just prejudiced sort of the way I look at the game, right? Because I'm already thinking like a midfielder there, right? Like, oh, who can I, if I have the ball, who can I
Right,
like
right, right.
bounce it
Who can
off
I
with? You know what
combine
I mean?
with?
Exactly. But
And
that's the lens with which I learned to see the game. I didn't always see it that way. But that was part of my maturation, is to understand like, listen,
yeah.
I'm one part of what's going on out here. And in order to be successful, I've got to really be tuned into how other people operate.
Okay, now I'm gonna take it to. I mean, I know you've been watching the Euros.
Hmm.
um, I'm not gonna date our podcast by telling exactly which games we're on, but I
Why
was
not? Why not?
okay. Today I watched England and Denmark.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
we're yeah.
and I'm also I'm very excited about the Brazil
Oh,
Argentina matchup.
can't
And,
wait.
and it's funny though, because as I'm watching these, I see all these, because I guess Twitter is kind of an echo chamber in as much as you have a certain group of people you interact with. And so, like, one of the things that I've seen is people complaining about the fields, right?
Oh, at Copa America.
Yeah, Copa America, right. And I'm like, you know, that's that's kind of funny because also the complaints and we've talked about this behind the scenes about certain players and their styles of play. And again, I go to music, right? Look, you got the Wu-Tang Clan, and then you got, okay, No Limit Soldiers. I mean, I know I'm dating myself a bit, but at the same time, everybody in those areas were just as excited about their crew. Those music, they sound nothing the same. And football is the same way. It's like, but what I see, and I think we discussed this, and I know I kind of had the order I want to go in. We're gonna look. I go with the flow, right?
Follow your dude. Yeah, your show,
so
man. Do
so
you?
I'm looking at it and I'm like, like I really enjoy watching Paul Pogba play,
Mm.
right? And when I hear people just bashing them, and I make them, I watch ESPN FC, and then at the same time, because I came into the game later, right? I don't have the old school stuff. I don't even have a lot of the history, like certain guys. So when I hear somebody like Roy Keane, and sometimes he's more like, well, he could be better if he does this, 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 and this. Now, I'm not going to say that that may not be true, but I just feel like I don't hear that with certain other players who need to do. And as someone pointed out, Zizou played a lot like Pogba.
Who pointed that out?
I think it was Kev. I don't know. Was it you? But
I'm not. I don't think I'm not breaking any ground there, but I'm just referring to something that I did say, because
you just said it today though. So I flash through those feeds so fast. Sometimes I don't give credit. I apologize.
Oh no! Sorry, that wasn't me seeking credit. I'm just saying that I've said that. I've heard that, and I've
right now. To be honest with you, I didn't see as much as Zizou as I did of Pogba.
Yeah, and it's not a like some people might listen in and be like, well, actually there are these differences, and it's not a not a 100% carbon copy. But you touch on some interesting things, and I've been very clear about this, and it's connected to a lot of things going on in the world, right? I don't just look at the game of football. We can't look at soccer, football, just in and of itself without the larger forces at play here, right? Mm-hmm. That impact the way people talk about the game, view the game, experience the game, right? We're talking about people. Right? Yeah, it's a sport. It's a sport played by people who are affected by these forces. Okay, so when you have a Paul Pogba, and you hear what's said about him, it makes you, and you connect that to other things. It becomes clear that that this man is so, and it's not just about him, and that's the issue, right? Because it's
if it was one guy, it would be. You start seeing similarities, because I'm going to tell you something.
Mm-hmm.
Look, when we play ball over here with PG Young Boys, we got guys that want to come play, mm-hmm. right? Now, the majority of the kids are Black, but the game is universal, mm-hmm. and just like. And I always compare it to the Rucker. That's always been the vibe that I wanted, which is a park in New York where the best come play. They had it here too at Barry Farms, right? They had summer leagues, and you would see Kevin Durant playing a whole different way. He spoke different languages, just like the way you got a dialect. I mean, shoot, if you're from up north, the way you talk to your homies could be totally different than the way you carry yourself in the boardroom, and that's because you can speak two languages. But for a lot of these people, they only speak one language. And so if you're not speaking it the way they want to hear it, meaning if let's say, a guy comes from Jamaica, they may have a style of play, which at the end of the day, when you're talking about the differences between Black and white players, sometimes it just seems like, okay, you don't like this, right? Now, Neymar, he's another one. He's got a way that he plays. I enjoy watching him, but at the same time, there may be parts of his game that I don't like, but I don't put it in a container of, and I like this guy more. It's just, it's an individual thing that I'm looking at.
Yeah. I was just saying, to be blunt, and the issues with and what I've tried to be clear about with you reference like my Twitter and be vocal about mm-hmm. certain things, is that what we're talking about is the proliferation of dominant narratives about the capabilities of Black bodies, Black and brown bodies. It's that simple, and how that's often determined by white males, right? And that's and then so that becomes an echo chamber of, well, this player is labeled as, with Pogba, you can say, I think Roy Keane actually said it in that video, is like ill-disciplined, for example, mm-hmm. And that becomes this all-encompassing thing, and it's interesting because what people, well, I would say a lot of people realize it, but they may not have the power to run the narrative, which is the point, right? Is that what people need to realize is that, like, on the one hand, you can critique any player. That's, of course you can, and not saying, of course, that a Pogba or Neymar are perfect. And it's funny because even, and people close to me, like my brother, for example, if you ask him, I've had several critiques about Neymar, several critiques about Pogba. I'm not even a Manchester United fan. I don't root for them in the EPL. I don't like them to win. That being said, I absolutely am fed up with certain narratives being taken as gospel just because a certain group of people says it.
Right.
And my point about football being part of a larger social need to be taken, all this needs to be taken in context within the larger social struggles, is that we know, for example, that racism is a problem in football. We know it.
Right.
And now, but then the question is, well, okay, how does this racism manifest? How does it show itself? Right? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What is, how does it, in the day to day, what are the things that are overt, that are like, oh man, that's bad, that's racism? And what are the things that are subtle, that the things that we just let pass, that are also problematic? And here's where we come to the issues with the Pogba and these other players and Neymar, that are seemingly subtle and just passed off as, oh, but it's just a difference of opinion, or it's my opinion. Or in the case of these pundits who have, hey, of course, done things in the game that I wasn't close to, right? I'm not, and it's not about that, but it's just about looking at the game and also hearing what people say, right? When you say things that are just on their, that have so many holes in them, right? That just don't pass any logic, but then because of who you are and because of your platform, it's taken seriously. That's a problem. We have to recognize it as such. So this is why there's videos about Lampard, right, talking about Pogba and or Roy Keane. When you talk about someone being, wow, they're just ill-disciplined, coaches, all coaches, regardless of their color, if they're serious coaches, they should understand that one of the things that poor coaches do, or not so good, maybe not so experienced coaches, is they use sloppy language. To me, that's sloppy language. So if I would question, even Roy Keane was sitting in front of us right now, I'd be like, okay, but Roy, what do you mean by ill-discipline in the context of the game that we just watched Pogba play, for example, right? What do we mean? And okay, be really detailed here. Like, what are we talking about? Because here's the thing. It's funny that you jumped that, in that video that you sent me, Roy Keane and Vieira talking about Paul Pogba being ill-disciplined. And we can watch the video. I think I remember it clearly. The ball that he gave away, he made a mistake. He gave the ball away. It was near midfield. They were talking about it like it was like on the top of the 18 or like in their own third. Right. The guy goes past 5-6 players still to score the goal. Now, that's not me saying that Pogba is no blame and it's all his teammates. No, but what I'm saying is it's nuanced. This is my point. It's more complex than, oh, Pogba's ill-disciplined. And isn't it interesting that that's the first thing you jump to from a player who, to be perfectly honest, in my opinion, was one of the top 5 players in the tournament. Pogba was France's best player. He was consistently in that game. He did things that were just outrageous. And if we really want to talk about it, had I think it was Kingsley Coman or someone, or maybe it was Mbappe as well. There were 2 passes at least that Pogba put guys through that were unreal passes that they didn't score on. That you would think, oh man, if only they had scored. And of course, he scored an amazing goal. Now, do you see all the things that I just went into about the good things he did, but also pointing out that he did these things? And when it comes to Paul Pogba, it's like all this other good thing, all these good things don't even matter because it boils down to, yeah, but he's just ill-disciplined. And the other thing is, on the one hand, people want him to do everything, right? What a curse it is to be that talented that people think you should be able to do, the defensive work of a Roy Keane, the offensive work of a Messi, and the up and down of a Gerrard. Well, that's not Pogba, and that's okay. Why not just celebrate the man for the
cool
amazing
stuff he does, right?
So boiling it down, the whole paradigm is off. And why is it off? It's because, and this is where Neymar, and all these other players are connected, it's because there's still a battle. People don't often call this out, right, for what it is.
Like,
but hold on 1 second. It's because there's a battle between this normative white gaze of, oh, this is what is acceptable, okay, and just dealing with the black body. Still in athletics, we have so many cases of that, and it's like people freak out and they don't even know what to do with the Pogba, right? It's insecurities. It's yes, it's racist because you're still going back to these tropes that we know are not true, right? Paul Pogba, you can't boil Paul Pogba down to ill discipline. Like, what does that mean? So the man doesn't think. Do you know how many languages Paul Pogba speaks, by the way?
No, how many?
I think he speaks like 4 or 5 languages. Like he's, I mean, he's, and it's well documented, right? He's an influential guy, and the only reason I bring that up is because these are things. So first, and he's a Muslim. These are facts, right? So this is a guy who is fasting, right? So like, I'm specifically tackling the ill discipline charge here, right? To point out the ridiculousness of this and to point out people sometimes don't zoom out. How do you call someone ill-disciplined when they are a devout, follower of their faith, and they do something, that drastic as fasting and still playing a professional sport? Like I don't know how guys do that. They do it. So there's that. There's the languages they speak, which is just an insane form of intelligence, right? People talk about all the time, like, oh, I wish I was bilingual. Imagine speaking 3. Right? He speaks very good English. He's right. He played in Italy, right? Speaks Spanish. Like, are you kidding me? Like, this is a guy who's just on another level with this, right? But you're gonna tell me that he's ill-disciplined because Roy Keane said so. That's not good enough.
I mean, and like I said, I'll break it down even more simply. See, like, because you're a coach, right? I'm a guy that loves to watch ball. I can manage a game probably, but I'm not a coach. And I would say this: the value of different things to different people. So in other words, he may not value the defensive duties as much as he values his offensive abilities. And you know what? As a coach, wouldn't you balance that out? The what do you call it? The pluses or the things that your players do well. I mean, even you look at your 14s, you know which ones do certain things really well. And I've seen coaches balance the field. I mean, I hear them talk about, oh, we put 2 6s and then we got a 10 that doesn't stay home, or whatever. And even on outside backs, you have the defensive guy, and you got the marauding wing back who really is a winger who probably who may not even be able to defend 1v1, or does not have the desire to do so because he's using his energy for other things. I mean, because soccer is a sport that you do have to decide how to use your resources.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. What it says to me is the relationships of the players, relationship of the coach to the players, and understanding how to use your guys. There are several players like this where it's like they're great in one environment, one system, then they go somewhere else and it's completely different. And why is that? In large part, it's because they're asked to do different things, and the pieces around them are different, which speaks exactly to your point of, well, if you're a coach, then part of your job is then to determine which people you're going to give more of a free role to, and which people you're going to say, hey, your role is more defined. Obviously, there's a lot of freedom within the game of football, which is beautiful, but some guys certainly have more defined roles.
Right.
Absolutely.
I've seen guys that they basically go wherever they want on the field, and then the expectation is the other players will know to flow into that space and compensate until the guy maybe decides he wants to come back. I mean, I've heard people say that about Messi. He just wherever he wants to be, and nobody's going to tell him.
Yeah, he's met. Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I used arguably the best in the
No,
world.
no, it's a good, but it's a good,
But
it's
it's
important.
like you won't hear somebody screaming at Messi to get back, right?
Well, but I still think that in the case of Pogba, because we brought him up in Euros, it's I want to juxtapose. I'm going to throw you. It's not a curveball, but I'm going to really highlight what I'm talking about in terms of the black body here, because I'm going to point out another French player who has a lot of things said about him that a lot of people think are compliments that I also think are problematic, and that's N'Golo Kante, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you know where I'm going with this, but N'Golo Kante is fantastic at what he does, right?
Yeah.
And he's more of a holding mid / box to box player than a Pogba is, right? Would you agree, right? And I don't think anybody. So there's intelligent people watching this, right? Intelligent football people. Everybody knows Kante doesn't have the all around skills that a Pogba does, right? Especially like in the attacking, like he doesn't do the same things. Now, what's interesting about Kante? What do you know? What word is commonly used to describe him by pundits and people? There's one word that I hear over and over and over again about Kante.
I mean, it basically is like he's got a motor. Like
there's that too. Yeah. Well, that's yeah. But the word is humble. The word is humble.
So that makes an assumption that he should be arrogant.
No, what I'm the thing about that interests me that it celebrates. So people go on, especially about how he basically stays in his lane. He's not flashy. Mm-hmm. He's not even. They talk about the car that he drives, right? The fact that he's like,
and his cell phone had a crack in it.
Yeah, whatever it is, they just big up the fact that he's so humble. Now, the reason I'm juxtaposing that with Pogba is because Pogba's criticized for things that have nothing to do even with football, right? For example, his hairstyle, right? Or his the way he dances. No, these are right. This happens.
Right.
And that's what I'm saying. It's so fascinating to look at these two players, right? Who are both obviously, Africans in France playing for the national team, and the difference in how they're treated in the press and whatever. And they're both world class. That's the other thing. They're both world class. So why the two differences? Pogba takes up more space, right?
So your thought would be he's more threatening.
100% to the white gaze. He's more threatening to this side. Kante, the reason people are so comfortable with N'Golo Kante being humble is because the idea of black people being assertive, being controlling, I'll be flat honest, being the best in the case of Pogba. Pogba is often the best player on the field in a game that he's playing. It doesn't matter whether he's playing club or country, right? There are certain games, of course, that he's not when there are other players who you're like, oh, that player's better. But often, Paul Pogba is the best player on the field. He proved that in his Euros. And there are other times. Paul Pogba is a player at Juventus they absolutely loved him, right? And now we go back to people saying things and we're taking him as gospel. That the video of Lampard talking about Paul Pogba at the Juventus days, right? Said something I think so ridiculous, right? That it's just like, how do people not see this? When he said that, like, he's in a room full of journalists or whatever, and he's talking about how, we've kind of built up this idea that Pogba was really good at Juve, and he kind of jokes about it to the audience, like, well, I don't know how much Italian football you all watch. I mean, to be honest, probably not that much, right? And it's like this, and so it's idea that, like, wow, you just admit that you didn't really watch, right, Serie A. You didn't watch Pogba play at Juventus, but of course he couldn't have been that good, right? And like, how ridiculous is that? Imagine being a coach, right? Imagine being a coach, and I'm like, I just get this new player on my team who other people say was just amazing at their old club, right? Or this other league, and they just killed it. Like, a lot of people say it, and there's video footage, and there's all this of this young player just being boss. And then I go, I mean, yeah, I didn't really watch it, but he couldn't have been that good. You see what I mean? It's so arrogant. It's so ridiculous, but he can say that and be taken serious. That's a problem. So now back to this Kante idea of, oh, people celebrate the fact that he's so humble. That's, again, yes, because he's less threatening. Because you're comfortable with you don't know what to do with the guy who's yeah, maybe makes you a little bit uncomfortable because he's flashy and he's all this, even though why that makes you uncomfortable, it's on you. You have to determine that. I don't know. It's not for me to determine, but I know it does make you uncomfortable because you won't shut up about it. Oh, why does he dance so much? Why does that matter to you?
Yeah.
The man can do just about anything on the field that you want him to do. But you're upset because he's dancing and you think that it's a problem because he moves a certain way.
Well, like, okay, let me bounce to another topic while we're here.
Yeah. You can see I'm really passionate about that one though.
No, and that's why I wanted you on here. So one of the like you remember that period where you had Sterling went and bought his mom a house.
Oh yeah.
Then Foden, I think it was Foden, did the exact same thing. And that newspaper, the headlines was like, one was like, oh man, Foden's such a great son. He brought his mommy a house. And then the other side, it's like, this guy gets a new contract and now he's out here buying houses and cars. Why are you in this man's pockets? First of all.
Yeah.
And now you answer me, why are they in that man's pockets?
No, there's.
Okay, that was part one. We got a little long-winded, so we released this one. Part two is coming soon. Hope you tune in and enjoy. Thank you.